They often say, a wedding is meant to be a grand unification of two families. On that particular day, I discovered it can just as swiftly become the stark dividing line that severs one of those families permanently. I had selected my suit with great care, nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed for validation. True dignity doesn't need to shout. It was a custom-tailored charcoal wool suit, a Patek Philippe watch I'd gifted myself after closing my first multi-billion-dollar deal, and a silk pocket square, the color of aged bourbon. My hair, silvering at the temples, was styled not in an attempt to appear younger, but as a statement that I refused to let age dictate my sense of self. At 61, I had forged a life out of corporate boardrooms and financial statements, not from groveling for anyone's acceptance. But on that day, the day of my only son's wedding, acceptance was a currency I never imagined I would be forced to spend. The ceremony itself was immaculately polished, expensive without tipping into vulgarity, tasteful yet devoid of any genuine warmth. I had noted every single detail. Not because I was ever consulted on the planning, I wasn't, but because I possess an innate ability to read a room the way a historian reads ancient texts. The floral arrangements were all white orchids and cream-colored roses. The table linens were clearly imported, and the champagne labels were a blatant display of wealth for anyone who bothered to notice. Clara Davenport certainly noticed. She always did. When the vows were exchanged, when Leo slipped that diamond band onto her delicate, perfectly manicured finger, and when a wave of applause erupted and the air was filled with the sound of camera shutters firing like a volley of gunfire, I managed to smile. It wasn't for them, nor for the assembled guests. It was for me, because I knew how to stand firm in the heart of a tempest without breaking. I moved forward for the family photographs, my Italian leather shoes steady on the marble flooring, and took my place where any father of the groom would naturally stand, right beside his son. That was the moment she angled her face toward me, her perfectly white teeth glinting like freshly sharpened blades. She didn't bother to lower her voice. "Could you perhaps move to the back?" she hissed, her lips still stretched into a grotesque caricature of a smile. "We wouldn't want you to spoil the wedding photos with your outdated suit. And, well, your old-fashioned look." It felt as if all sound had been vacuumed from the room. I heard her. I am certain the bridesmaids heard her. The photographer's hands froze for a fraction of a second, then resumed their work as though documenting such casual cruelty was just part of the service. Leo, my son, was sharing a laugh with his best man, completely oblivious. I could have responded. Lord knows I possess the vocabulary, the life experience, and the sheer weight of 61 years, along with a professional reputation that made developers twice my size tremble in their expensive shoes. But I remained silent. I felt my spine straighten, felt the insult wash over my skin like a sudden frost, and then I smiled. A slow, measured, deliberate smile. It was not the smile of forgiveness, nor the smile of capitulation. It was the smile of a grandmaster in chess, sacrificing a pawn while already foreseeing the inevitable fall of the opponent's queen. And with that, I walked away past the whispers, past the group rehearsing the bouquet toss, past my son who remained blissfully unaware, and made my way to the table laden with wedding gifts. There it was, a large, white-lacquered box, tied with a gold ribbon. It was heavy, containing a gift that could have fundamentally altered their future. Inside was the deed to a secluded home in Big Sur, overlooking the ocean, worth more than the garish dress she was so proud of. She was deriding me for a collection of documents that included the transfer of ownership for 2 commercial rental properties just outside Denver, 6 units, all fully occupied, generating a consistent income. Also inside was the title to a brand new top-of-the-line Cadillac Escalade with a ribbon-tied photograph of it tucked neatly within. And, at the very bottom, in a sealed manila envelope, was the proof of a reality only I was aware of. Her family's corporate empire was a fragile paper palace, propped up by a series of loans that I personally controlled. Their financial liquidity was a balloon, and I was holding the pin. I hadn't arranged it this way out of malice. It was insurance, should they ever require a reminder of the true source of their stability. That was meant to be their wedding present. But gifts are not entitlements. They are gestures of goodwill, and when such gestures are met with mockery, they can be redirected. I picked up the box. My movements were smooth, intentional. Not a single person tried to stop me. No one questioned why. To them, I was just the aging father, retreating with his wounded pride tucked under his arm. At the grand doorway, I cast one final look back. Clara was laughing, her white teeth exposed, her head thrown back like a monarch who believed her crown was an inherited right. I committed her face to memory, noting the way the light glinted off her diamonds. Not because I wished to preserve the memory, but because I intended to bury it. Outside, the air felt gentler. Evening was descending, painting the sky in shades of bruised lavender and gold. The sounds of music and celebration drifted from another street nearby, laughter and joyous cheers, the universal anthem of a wedding. I should have summoned my driver, slipped into the waiting car, and simply vanished. But destiny often presents alternative paths if you are willing to keep your eyes open. I followed the sound of the music down the block, past the perfectly manicured estates and the lines of valet attendants. And there it was, a smaller venue, far less opulent, but infinitely brighter, more alive. It was a wedding that overflowed with warmth instead of stiff formality. People were dancing without shoes on the lawn. Children were chasing one another, brandishing sparklers that were already lit. I hesitated at the edge of the celebration, an uninvited guest in a bespoke suit and a Patek Philippe watch. I should have felt entirely out of place. Instead, for the first time, I felt truly seen, because the groom, a young man whose face I vaguely recognized, whose name came back to me in a faint whisper, Samuel, turned, saw me, and his eyes widened, not in alarm, but in what looked like profound gratitude. "You're Arthur Vance," he said, rushing toward me, his bride close behind. "My uncle always talked about you. He said you created that small business incubator program that kept him from losing his shop during the downturn. You don't know me, sir, but you changed my family's entire life." He shook my hand before I could even formulate a reply. His grip was firm, his suit smelling of fresh air and happiness. Around us, guests were smiling, nodding, recognizing my name not with the green tint of envy but with genuine respect. Someone brought me a chair. Someone else offered me a glass of iced tea. I was treated, for the first time that day, as if I truly belonged. And I knew, with the sharp clarity of a key sliding perfectly into a lock, precisely where the box in my hands was meant to go. I sat. I smiled. And when the moment felt right, I placed it carefully on Samuel's gift table. Inside, I slipped in a new note. "On a rainy day, you offered me kindness when I had none. Tonight, I offer you a home, a vehicle, and a future." Because kindness is an investment that always pays dividends. When I finally stood to depart, Samuel's eyes were glistening, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked me over and over. Guests applauded and raised their glasses in a toast. I slipped away without a fuss, leaving that warmth behind me and walking toward the cold, difficult work that awaited me. Because true revenge doesn't make a grand announcement. It whispers in boardrooms, It files legal documents in the dead of night. It waits patiently until the ink is dry, the champagne has gone flat, and the airline tickets are non-refundable. At my son's wedding, they asked me to stand at the back so I wouldn't ruin the picture. I simply walked out of the frame and decided to redraw the entire composition. The sheer weight of that box haunted me as I settled into the back seat of my car. Not its physical mass, it was no more than 6 or 7 pounds, with ribbons tugging at its lacquered sides, the documents within stacked as immaculately as only my legal team could arrange them. It was the weight of my intention. I had brought it to the wedding filled with hope, not with malice. I had believed, perhaps with a touch of naivety, that giving Clara something so substantial, so undeniable, would help to smooth the jagged edges that existed between us. Perhaps she would never grow to love me. Perhaps she would never even like me. But she would respect me, and I would have the peace of knowing I had done everything in my power to give my son's marriage a solid foundation. Instead, that box had transformed into something else entirely. It had become a ledger where an account of kindness had been closed and an account of cruelty had been opened. When people see my name, Arthur Vance, in glossy business journals, next to phrases like the titan of commercial real estate or the deal maker who never loses, they make assumptions. They assume I inherited my wealth, that I married into it, or that I charmed it out of boardrooms with a disarming smile. They are mistaken. I was born the son of a steel mill foreman and a public school librarian in a small town in Ohio. My earliest lessons about value were not about currency, but about scarcity, about a winter coat that was patched not once, but twice, about light bulbs being unscrewed from one room to be used in another. I fought my way into the world of real estate because it was the one arena where audacity was rewarded as much as a prestigious family name. I endured 18-hour workdays, brokered deals in greasy spoon diners at midnight, and learned to outmaneuver men who equated a polite demeanor with being a pushover. By the time I was 30, I was earning 6 figures. By 45, 7. At 50, I was appointed Executive Vice President of Apex Global Properties, the most formidable firm of its kind in the nation. Now, at 61, my personal net worth could buy and sell the family fortunes of half the people who whisper about the silver in my hair. And Clara knew that, which made her insult cut all the more deeply. That box was not just a present, it was a strategic move. Inside it lay 3 foundational pillars. First, the Big Sur Retreat, a white stucco jewel nestled on a cliff above the Pacific. I had purchased it outright for $4.2 million, not through a public listing, but privately, through a developer who owed me a significant number of favors. I had pictured Leo and Clara sipping their morning coffee on its veranda, the vast ocean as their backyard, their future children learning the scent of salt on the wind. Second, the 2 rental properties in Denver, 6 stores, all fully leased, with a net operating income of $210, 0 per year, a tidy passive stream of revenue. I had acquired those parcels years ago at a steep discount during an economic downturn. Now, their capitalization rate was the kind of gift that also served as a security blanket. Third, the Cadillac Escalade, a 2025 model, pearl white with a custom interior. A luxury, certainly, but also a symbol. I wanted them to drive into their new life together with a sense of pride, not weighed down by monthly payments. And then, at the very bottom, was the envelope. It was not meant for them to see right away, but it was a necessary insurance policy. Because I am not just a father, I am an investor. And an investor always protects his positions. The Davenports Clara's family owned Davenport Industries, a mid-sized real estate development firm. They had glossy advertisements, flashy project launches, and cocktail parties in sprawling penthouses. To the outside world, they were the picture of prosperity. From the inside, I knew the real story. 3 years ago, they had approached me in a state of desperation. They were overextended. Their projects leveraged to the breaking point, and construction delays were causing them to hemorrhage cash. The banks were beginning to circle, whispering words like foreclosure and bankruptcy. They needed liquidity, and I had it. So, I structured a deal. A $35 million revolving bridge line of credit through my private family office, callable on 30 days' notice if any covenants were breached. An $18 million preferred equity stake that ensured my distributions were paid before theirs and gave me voting rights if certain triggers were hit. Vendor financing on 2 of their key parcels through my REIT affiliate, and a master lease on their flagship tower, signed by my firm, but written with a critical key man and reputation clause. It was all clean, entirely legal, and incredibly precarious for them, because while they were playing at building an empire, I knew they were just one poor quarterly report away from total collapse. They had tethered their very survival to me. I had never intended to use that leverage. Not until Clara's words sliced through the air like a bullwhip. Outdated suit, old-fashioned look, stand at the back. What she failed to comprehend was that her family's entire empire was already standing at the back, behind me. But what truly cemented my decision to redirect the gift wasn't just her cruelty, it was a memory. 2 months prior, in March, the sky over Chicago had violently torn open. Sheets of rain, the kind that renders umbrellas utterly useless. My driver was late, snarled in traffic. And yes, even I found myself stranded, clutching a dead phone under the awning of a construction site. Cars hissed past, taxis already occupied. My silk shirt was plastered to my skin, my expensive shoes ruined. And then, a young man approached me. He was wearing a simple cotton shirt, his hair soaked and plastered to his forehead. He didn't recognize me, didn't ask for a thing. He just held out his umbrella, pressed it into my hand, and said, "Sir, you look like you need this more than I do." My pride, stiff in my throat, made me refuse at first. He insisted. Then he called his fiancée, asked her to come with their car, and they personally drove me to my building on Lakeshore Drive. He never once hinted that he knew who I was, never asked for a favor, never even gave me his name. It was only later, through a mutual acquaintance, that I learned his name was Samuel Rose, that he worked as an EMT, that he was engaged to be married, and that his modest wedding was happening on the exact same night as Leo's, just 2 streets over. I had walked toward it, the heavy box in my hand, and when Samuel saw me, recognized me, and thanked me for a program I had created years before, I had a profound realization. Kindness deserves to be capitalized. Far more than cruelty deserves to be forgiven. Back in my car that night, the city lights sliding across the windows, I rested my hand on the box and replayed Clara's words in my mind. Stand at the back. Outdated suit. Old-fashioned look. I saw the smirk on her face when she said it. A smirk not of nervousness or accident, but of triumph. She wanted me to feel diminished, erased, publicly humiliated. She succeeded for a fleeting moment, but she failed to calculate the consequences of humiliating a man who owns the very pen that can erase your entire empire. Because inside that box was not just real estate, not just luxury. It was proof. Proof that Davenport Industries was a house of cards propped up by my money, my contracts, and my patience. Proof that I could, with a single signature, call in their debts and strip away their illusions. And I fully intended to. I once heard a lawyer state in a courtroom, "The law is not about fairness. It is about enforcement." The same holds true for family. I had tried fairness. I had tried generosity. But enforcement, that was a language Clara understood the least and was about to learn the hardest. So I sat there in the back of my car, the rain-streaked glass catching the neon glow of the city, and I made my decision. The box would stay with Samuel. The empire would fall with Clara. And when the calls began, the begging, the bargaining, the incessant ringing of phones, I would not answer. Because my revenge was not going to be loud. It was going to be silent, surgical, and signed. By the time we pulled into the driveway of my townhouse, I was calm, almost serene. I carried the box inside, dried it with a soft cloth, and added one final note to the envelope before having it delivered to Samuel the next morning. When someone shows you who they truly are, believe them. When someone shows you kindness, remember them. May this gift be the start of a life built on gratitude, not on arrogance. Then I poured myself a glass of scotch, opened my laptop, and began drafting the notices that would turn Davenport Industries to ash. Because revenge, much like real estate, is all about location, and I held the high ground. Numbers have always been my sanctuary. When they feel betrayed, other people seek solace in faith or in wine or in the arms of strangers. I turn to ledgers. I turn to clauses and contracts, and to the kind of cold, hard numbers that never, ever lie. The morning after the wedding, I woke before the sun, sleep having eluded me. I sat in my study, a room with glass walls lined with shelves of leather-bound legal texts and financial reports. Outside, Lakeshore Drive was still quiet, the hum of traffic just beginning to rise. Inside, I spread the documents related to Davenport Industries across my expansive mahogany desk. The file had been sitting there for months, untouched, like a loaded pistol I had never intended to fire. Not until Clara provided me with a reason. To the world, Davenport Industries was a dynasty. They appeared in glossy magazines, Clara posing with her mother at charity galas, her father in impeccably tailored suits, breaking ground on new projects with a ceremonial silver shovel. Leo now tucked neatly on her arm, like the final perfect accessory. But I had seen their financial records, and the truth was grotesque. The family was drowning in over-leverage. They had too many projects in development, with investors growing restless and banks circling like vultures. Their debt service coverage ratio was hovering at a perilous 1.05, essentially a corpse propped upright and made to look alive. Their interest coverage was even worse, disguised by accounting tricks so amateurish, I almost felt pity for them. Almost. I was the one who had kept them afloat. 3 years earlier they had come to me, begging for a financial lifeline, and I, in a moment of what I now see as foolish mercy, had agreed. But I didn't just hand them cash like a philanthropist, giving alms. No, I structured the deal like a surgeon setting broken bones. Every clause was a stitch, every signature a suture. A $35 million revolving bridge line of credit, callable in 30 days if they breached any covenants. $18 million in preferred equity, ensuring my distributions were paid before theirs, and that my vote would be triggered in the event of a default. Vendor financing on 2 of their most critical parcels, with a loan secured by my REIT affiliate. A master lease on their flagship tower, signed by my firm, but with a keyman clause and a reputation clause that I myself had penned. I had written those clauses late one night, my Mont Blanc pen scratching across the fine print, while Chicago slept. They thought I was being generous. They called me family. They sent me extravagant Christmas baskets. They never once grasped that they had constructed their entire empire on paper that I controlled. As I reread the contracts, I thought about the box I had taken from the wedding gift table. It had been more than just a present. It had been an anchor, a chance for Clara to tether herself to something tangible and real. The Big Sur cottage, the Denver properties, the Escalade, it was all proof that even if she detested me, I had intended to provide her with security. Instead, she had mocked my outdated suit. She had spat old-fashioned look in front of the cameras. She thought she had banished me to the back of a photograph. What she didn't realize was that I held the negatives to their entire existence. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, no sugar, and began to outline my campaign. 1. A MAC notice, material adverse change triggered by reputational risk. Clara's family had been photographed in compromising situations before. Tax questions, delayed projects, whispers of unpaid vendors. A few quiet leaks to the right people, and I would have my grounds. 2. Acceleration. The vendor notes would be called in. They didn't possess the liquidity to cover even one of those payments if I demanded it immediately. 3. Termination. The master lease on their showrooms. Without the staged apartments and the glossy towers filled with non-existent tenants, their entire sales machine would grind to a halt. 4. An audit alert. A simple notification to their auditors regarding their revised cash position. It wasn't a smear campaign, nothing illegal. It was just honesty, which for them would be fatal. 5. A preferred exit. I would quietly sell my preferred equity position into an escrow fund. The money would become untouchable, frozen pending the results of the audit. Dominoes, all lined up perfectly. The flick of my pen would be all it took to set them tumbling. I leaned back in my chair and looked at a framed photograph on my desk. It was Leo, at age 10, holding a hammer, beaming at me after we had built a treehouse together. His curls were wild, his hands covered in splinters. He had looked up at me then, as if I could build anything, fix anything. And now, here I was, preparing to shatter the very foundation beneath his wife's family. Would he see it as a betrayal? Would he hate me for it? I closed my eyes and replayed Clara's voice in my head. Stand at the back? Outdated suit? Old-fashioned look? No, this wasn't betrayal. This was protection. She had tried to humiliate me, and in doing so, she had revealed her true character. And if she was this cruel to me in public, what would she be to him in private? This wasn't just about vengeance. It was about ensuring Leo saw the truth. I laid my Mont Blanc pen across the documents like a general laying a sword across a map. Each clause was a landmine, each contract a trench, each covenant a choke point. I would not fire a single bullet. I would not light a single match. I would simply stop holding them up, and gravity would do the rest. My phone buzzed. It was Leo. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I played the message. Dad. Hey, just wanted to say thank you. Clara's still asleep. Yesterday was a lot. I know she can be a bit sharp sometimes, but she really does care. I'll call you later, okay? Love you. His voice cracked slightly on the words, love you. For a fleeting moment, my pen stilled. But then I looked at the numbers again. Cold, precise, unforgiving. And I reminded myself, love does not erase cruelty. Contracts don't lie. And tomorrow, neither would I. Revenge is often depicted as a raging fire, burning, consuming, indiscriminate. But fire is sloppy. Revenge, when executed properly, is water, patient, inevitable. Water does not roar. It drips. It erodes. It undermines until the mountain itself collapses under the weight of its own arrogance. And as I signed the first draft of my MAC notice, I felt no flames within me. Only water cold, steady, and unstoppable. If Clara's wedding had been a performance staged for glossy magazines, brittle smiles, forced laughter, every move choreographed for the cameras, then Samuel's wedding was its complete opposite. It was messy, joyful, and real. And it was the place where I finally put the box down, where it truly belonged. I hadn't planned to go back the next day. I had intended to file my notices, meet with my attorneys, and begin the slow legal strangulation of Davenport Industries. But something was nagging at me, an unfinished thread that needed to be tied. So I returned to that street. 2 blocks over from the cathedral-like venue of Clara's wedding stood a small church with white clapboard siding and a lawn dotted with simple folding chairs. It didn't look like the kind of place where power gathered. It looked like the kind of place where love gathered, and that distinction made all the difference. I arrived in a simple black suit, my Patek Philippe watch at my wrist, carrying the white lacquered box in my arms. It felt heavier than it had the day before, heavier with the weight of my decision, heavier with the consequences that would follow. The air was filled with the sound of violin music and children's laughter. Couples were twirling on the lawn. A line of picnic tables overflowed with potluck dishes, alongside elegant champagne flutes. The scent of roses and roasted chicken mingled in the spring breeze. For the first time in years, I walked into a wedding celebration and felt genuinely welcome. Samuel saw me almost immediately. He gasped, still clutching a champagne flute, and hurried toward me, his tie slightly askew. "Mr. Vance," he breathed, "you really came back?" There was awe in his voice, but not the brittle, transactional awe of social climbers like Clara. This was genuine, heartfelt gratitude. His bride, Amelia, followed quickly, shaking my hand so firmly that I almost laughed. "You don't know us, sir, but you saved my uncle's business with that incubator program. Without it, he would have lost everything." I blinked. That program had been one of 100 initiatives I had spearheaded at Apex Global. It was one of the few things I had done not for profit but for principle. And here, in this humble yard with folding chairs and sparklers, it clearly meant more than any multi-billion-dollar deal I had ever closed in downtown Chicago. Amelia squeezed my hands. "Please, sit with us. Your family here." Family. A word Clara had wielded like a weapon just the day before. Here, it was offered as a gift. They insisted I take a seat in the front row, though I assured them I hadn't come to interrupt. Someone fetched me a glass of lemonade, cold and tart. Children danced barefoot in the grass, giggling as they chased bubbles through the air. Other guests leaned in to thank me, to share stories of how my various programs or properties had indirectly touched their lives. I had walked into Clara's wedding feeling like an inconvenience. Here I was being treated like royalty, not because of my money, but because of my impact, and it struck me with the force of a revelation. A legacy is not built on who fears you. It's built on who remembers your kindness. During the toasts, I rose quietly and carried the box to the gift table. The table was humble, adorned with wrapped packages from department stores, envelopes with handwritten notes, and mason jars filled with dollar bills for their honeymoon fund. My lacquered box gleamed against them like a piece of ivory among pebbles. I set it down gently, then opened it one last time. Inside lay the deeds, the car title, the documents for the Denver properties, the sealed envelope with the dossier on Davenport Industries' vulnerabilities, and now a new note in my own hand. On a rainy day, you offered me shelter when I had none. Today, I offer you a home, a vehicle, and land shelter for generations. Kindness earns compound interest. Consider this your dividend. I tucked the note inside, smoothed the ribbon, and stepped back. It happened sooner than I had anticipated. Amelia's bridesmaids, helping her sort through the gifts, lifted the lid of the box. Her gasps silenced the surrounding chatter. She pulled out the first deed, the one for the Big Sur cottage, with photographs clipped to the title. Her hand flew to her mouth. Then she saw the car title, and then the documents for the Denver properties. Her voice broke as she read the note I had left aloud. The crowd erupted. Applause thundered through the air. Whistles cut through the evening. Glasses clinked. Children clapped without really understanding why. Samuel kissed his bride's forehead, completely stunned, with tears streaming down his cheeks. And then the guests began chanting my name. Arthur! 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 I raised my hand once, modestly, then lowered it. I had not come for recognition. I had come to redirect destiny. But the recognition, I had to admit, tasted sweet all the same. I wasn't blind to the irony of the situation. Clara and Amelia had grown up in similar circles. Clara, the heiress with designer dresses, before she could even spell the names. Amelia, the EMT's daughter, who had worked double shifts to pay for her schooling. They had competed against each other in school debates and academic competitions. Clara had mocked her mercilessly, calling her charity case, rag doll, and rain girl. And now, on the very same weekend, one bride had lost a fortune because of a careless insult. The other had gained one because of a kindness offered in a storm. It wasn't just justice, it was poetry. As the sun dipped below the horizon and sparklers began to light up the twilight, I slipped away. Amelia tried to stop me, tears shining in her eyes. "Stay," she begged. "Dance with us, you're part of this." I kissed her cheek. "Build well," I whispered, because I knew that staying too long would turn an act of generosity into a spectacle. And revenge, even when it is redirected as a reward, must always remain dignified. I walked back to my car, the sound of my shoes clicking against the pavement, and slid into the leather seat. The box was no longer in my possession, but its contents had already rewritten two destinies. I checked my watch. 8:55 p.m. From the back seat, I opened my tablet. The Mac notice was already drafted. I read it one last time, savoring the cold precision of its language. Not a single word of malice, only fact. Material adverse change, covenant drift, reputation clause invoked. At 9:10 p.m., my counsel served it electronically. At 9:32 p.m., the master lease termination was filed. At 10:05 p.m., the vendor acceleration notices went out. At 10:44 p.m., the auditors were notified. By 11:15 p.m., the avalanche had begun. As my car turned onto Lakeshore Drive, I lowered the window. Faintly, from 2 streets away, I could still hear the music and laughter from Amelia's reception. I imagined Clara and Leo boarding their honeymoon flight, completely oblivious, posting photos of clinking champagne flutes. 2 brides, 2 boxes, 2 fates, sealed on a single night. Clara had thought she could erase me from her photographs. What she didn't know was that I had placed her entire family in a different kind of frame, a financial one, carved in ink and iron. And soon, when the calls began, when the credit lines snapped shut, when their family business collapsed into dust, she would finally understand the true price of arrogance. Because revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it smiles, sets down a box, and leaves quietly through the side door. Morning arrived with the sound of silence, but it was not the comforting silence of peace. It was the loaded, heavy silence of a city holding its breath, waiting for news. I woke just after 6, sunlight streaking across my bedroom wall, the faint murmur of traffic rising from Lakeshore Drive below. I slipped into my robe, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat in my breakfast nook with my phone placed face down beside me. I didn't need to check it yet. I knew exactly what I would find. A cascade of missed calls, frantic text messages, and voicemails stacking up one on top of the other. The avalanche I had set in motion the night before was already rolling, and I had no desire to watch it crush them in real time. Avalanches, after all, do not require supervision. I took my time, sipping my coffee, slicing an orange, and opening the newspaper. Not the digital feed, but the actual paper, folded and creased by the doorman downstairs. It was a habit from an earlier era, one that always grounded me. My eyes skimmed the headlines about international markets and political squabbles, the usual noise. The story that mattered wasn't there yet. It would be by the afternoon. When I finally turned my phone over, it lit up instantly, vibrating like a trapped animal. 12 missed calls from Leo between midnight and dawn. 5 from Charles Davenport, 1 from Clara, and 2 from unknown numbers that I recognized as belonging to law firms. My voicemail icon glowed an angry red. 93 messages. I listened to the first few. Leo's voice, frantic and pleading. "Dad, what is happening?" "Clara's dad says you pulled all the financing, that the banks are freezing their accounts. Please, just tell me this isn't true." His tone shifted with each subsequent call, from confusion to anger, and finally to desperation. Charles's messages were shorter, clipped, and furious. "This is outrageous, Arthur. You have no grounds for this. Call me back immediately, or we will sue." Clara's was the most predictable of all, a shrill voice dripping with venom. "I always knew you hated me. You've ruined us just because you're jealous. But you can't destroy me. Everyone will know what you've done." As it turned out, everyone already did. At 8:00 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't family. It was my contact at the bank, a man with whom I had carved up downtown Chicago deals over martinis like a pair of surgeons. His voice was calm, but the undertone was electric. "Arthur," he said, "the Davenport credit facilities have been frozen. Audit reports flagged them at 7:00 a.m. Vendors are already filing liens." He paused. "The Journal called me. They're chasing the story. The word is you pulled out. Do you want to give them a statement?" I declined. The true beauty of revenge lies in restraint. Let the numbers speak for themselves. Let the silence hang in the air. By 9:00 a.m., the press had the story. Major developer faces liquidity crisis. After key investor exit. The headline was clinical, but the subtext was poison. It confirmed what I wanted to be whispered in every corner office in the city. That Davenport Industries wasn't just weakened, it was radioactive. Analysts were quoted anonymously. Over-reliance on a single investor. Fragile capital structure. Exposed. Confidence has been shaken. In the world of finance, confidence is oxygen. Once it's gone, suffocation is immediate. By 10:00 a.m., the panic had spread to the ground level. Subcontractors who hadn't been paid in weeks flooded social media with angry posts. A photo of a half-finished tower went viral with the caption, "Davenport Dreams, Davenport Debt." Hashtags began to multiply. Competitors started circling, brokers began whispering, and junior employees started calling recruiters. In real estate, a collapse moves much faster than construction. And still my phone rang. Leo again. I ignored it until the 13th call, then finally picked up, not out of compassion, but out of strategy. I wanted to hear his voice when the cracks in his world had turned into craters. Dad. He was breathless, as if he had been running. You have to stop this, please. Clara is crying. Her dad is losing his mind. The office is in chaos. They're all saying you triggered this. Tell me you didn't. I didn't trigger anything, Leo, I said evenly, stirring my coffee. I simply stopped holding them up. Stopped holding? His voice broke. Dad, people's jobs are on the line. Do you understand that? You're punishing me. You're punishing all of us. Because Clara said something stupid at the wedding. I let the silence hang for a moment before answering. Your wife didn't just say something stupid, Leo. She revealed exactly who she is. And I will not bankroll arrogance and cruelty. He exhaled sharply, the sound of someone trying to hold back a torrent of anger. You're destroying my marriage. No, I said, softly but firmly. I'm revealing what your marriage was built on. There is a difference. He hung up without another word. I finished my coffee. By noon, reporters had set up camp outside the Davenport headquarters, their cameras flashing every time an employee scurried in or out, avoiding their questions. A leaked internal email made its way online, detailing the acceleration notices, the frozen equity, and the termination of the showroom leases. Someone had forwarded it to a journalist, and within minutes, it was everywhere. Davenport Industries, on the verge of insolvency. Charles tried calling again. I didn't pick up. His lawyer sent a letter, blustering about wrongful termination and bad faith. My attorneys laughed, then filed the letter neatly away. Every clause I had invoked was completely airtight. They knew it. They would bluster until they realized how utterly useless it was. At 2:00 p.m., the Journal published a follow-up piece. This one had photographs. Leo and Clara at the airport, returning early from their honeymoon, their faces pale, surrounded by a throng of reporters shouting questions. Clara wore sunglasses, her mouth twisted in a mask of irritation, not fear. Leo just looked broken. The avalanche was no longer silent. It was roaring, carrying them downhill while I stood at the summit watching. By evening, my phone had finally stopped vibrating. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of exhaustion. They had realized I would not be answering. They had realized the avalanche could not be stopped, and they had realized that the man they had tried to humiliate at a wedding photograph had more power with a pen than they had with all their inherited family wealth. I sat in my study, the lights low, watching the city settle into dusk. The papers on my desk were tidy again, the contracts stacked, the pens capped. The work was done. Gravity was doing the rest. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile. Not the brittle smile I had worn at the wedding, not the polite smile at Samuel's reception, but a real, genuine smile. A quiet acknowledgement that revenge had been achieved, not through screaming or spectacle, but through cold, hard precision. The Davenports had built an empire of glass. All I had done was withdraw my hand, and now the shards were falling, one by one, slicing their reputation to ribbons. The avalanche had begun, and I had never once had to raise my voice. They thought distance would offer them protection. They thought that running off to the Bahamas, drinking champagne in private cabanas, and posting smiling photographs to Instagram would somehow insulate them from the avalanche that had begun back in Chicago. But avalanches do not respect geography. They follow you. They will bury you wherever you happen to be standing. By the time their plane touched down in the islands, the MAC notices were already circulating among lawyers. The vendor acceleration notices were stacked on desks at Davenport Industries, and their auditors were on emergency calls with the banks. Leo and Clara had smiled for the cameras at the airport as they boarded their flight in matching linen outfits, blissfully unaware of the storm that was gathering. By the time they checked into their oceanfront suite, the first headlines were already online. Davenport Industries faces liquidity review after key investor exit. The wording was polite, but anyone in the industry could read between the lines. I didn't follow the updates minute by minute. That kind of obsession would have felt beneath me. Instead, I went about my daily routine. Breakfast at 8, a meeting with my assistant at 10, a conference call with the board of Apex Global at 11. They all knew, of course, though no one said a word about it directly. My very presence on the call was confirmation enough. I spoke crisply, clinically, making no reference whatsoever to Davenport. That was the point. To treat their collapse as an event so trivial it didn't even warrant a comment. Meanwhile, in the Bahamas, Clara was ordering lobster tails and rosé by the pool, her phone buzzing with notifications that she silenced with a dismissive swipe of her manicured nails. She had posted a photo at noon, her hand clutching a champagne glass, the turquoise ocean behind her with the caption, "Mrs. Davenport forever." The comments that followed were not what she had expected. "Is it true about your family? Your father's company is collapsing. Why are you in the Bahamas? Enjoy the honeymoon while you can, sweetheart. The money's gone." Within hours, she had turned off the ability to comment on her posts, but the screenshots had already gone viral. That evening, Leo called me again. I picked up this time, not out of mercy, but out of curiosity. I wanted to hear the desperation in his voice sharpen. "Dad." His voice was strained, the background noisy with the sounds of a resort band. "I don't know what's happening, but everyone is saying you pulled out, that you tanked the company. Dad says you blindsided him. Why would you do this?" I let him speak, sipping tea on my balcony overlooking the lake. "Leo, nothing has happened that wasn't already inevitable. I simply refuse to underwrite it any longer." "You refuse?" His voice cracked. "Dad, Clara is crying in the bathroom. The press is calling her phone non-stop. They're saying we could lose the house. Do you know what that's doing to her?" "She'll survive," I said coolly. "She has a talent for survival. As long as others are doing the labor, perhaps now she'll learn what it feels like when the ground shifts beneath her own feet." "God, Dad." His words tumbled out, panicked. "You're punishing me too. Do you even realize that? I married her. She's my wife. Don't you care what happens to me?" That struck a chord. I closed my eyes and pictured him at 6 years old, his curls bouncing as he ran to show me a crayon drawing he had made of a house with our names on it. He had looked at me with such absolute trust back then. Now his voice was tight with a sense of betrayal. "I care," I said slowly. "But love doesn't mean enabling. You walked her down that aisle knowing what kind of woman she was. I saw it in her eyes, the very first night you introduced her to me. Ambition without an ounce of gratitude. You thought you could change her. You can't, and I won't." He was silent for a long moment. Then he whispered, "You've destroyed me," and hung up. I stared at the phone for a while, then set it aside. He was wrong. I hadn't destroyed him. I had given him a chance to see clearly. Whether he chose to or not was now his burden to carry. While Leo was flailing in the Bahamas, Chicago was on fire. Reporters were camped outside the Davenport Industries headquarters, their cameras snapping every time an employee entered or exited. Photos of staff members carrying boxes of personal files were splashed across the news with captions like, "Exodus at Davenport," "Vendors filed liens," "Unions threatened strikes." Employees who had spent years parading their loyalty to Charles Davenport were suddenly updating their resumes. The entire edifice was crumbling stone by stone. The Journal ran a second piece. This one quoted anonymous insiders who described the company as a house of cards long dependent on one investor's patience. Everyone knew who that investor was. They didn't have to name me. My silence was its own headline. And while the avalanche rolled on, Clara posed for staged honeymoon photos, her smile frozen, her eyes darting nervously off camera. On their second night, she tried to reserve a private yacht for a sunset cruise. The resort concierge politely informed her that the credit card on file had been declined. She produced another one. Declined. She snapped at the staff, her voice sharp enough to draw stares from nearby guests. "Do you know who I am?" she hissed. "I am Clara Davenport. This is just a temporary issue." My father. Her father, at that very moment, was in a downtown Chicago office being grilled by bankers who were demanding collateral he could not produce. Drew tried his own card, declined again. The concierge's smile was fixed, rehearsed. "Perhaps you'd prefer one of our smaller packages, sir." They slumped back to their cabana, utterly humiliated, the whispers of the other guests following them like smoke. The following morning, the paparazzi found them. Photos were splashed across the tabloids. Clara shielding her face with a sun hat. Leo looking exhausted, his shirt wrinkled. The headlines were merciless. "Honeymoon in crisis. Davenport heiress spotted as family business collapses." I read the articles at my breakfast table, the photographs crisp on the newsprint, and I felt nothing but a cold, hard satisfaction. Clara had wanted me pushed to the back of the wedding photos, erased from the narrative. Now it was her face, front and center, humiliated on every front page. Leo called again that evening. His tone was different this time, low and raw. "Dad, please. If there's anything you can do, at least for me. I don't care about her, about the company, but this is my life. Everything is falling apart." I let his words hang in the air, then replied softly, "No, Leo. This was never your life. It was theirs. You just stepped into it. Maybe now you'll remember who you are without their name propping you up." "You don't understand," he whispered. "We'll have nothing." I smiled faintly. "Then you'll finally know what it means to build something yourself." He didn't answer, and for the first time, he didn't leave a voicemail when he hung up. By the time their honeymoon was over, the Davenport name had become synonymous with failure. Banks had pulled their lines of credit, lawsuits were pending, and their glossy downtown office was half empty. Employees described the mood inside as funereal. The press used words like implosion and collapse. Clara returned to Chicago with her sunglasses and her brittle smile, pretending that nothing was wrong. But the paparazzi caught her yelling at a driver who had opened the wrong car door for her. Leo trailed behind her, his face pale, avoiding eye contact with the cameras. The avalanche had followed them across oceans and into airports, crushing them with each step they took. And through it all, I remained silent. I didn't gloat publicly. I didn't grant interviews. I didn't so much as raise my voice. My silence was louder than any declaration could ever be. I had been told to stand at the back. Now, Clara stood at the very center of humiliation, and I wasn't even in the picture. By the time Clara and Leo's ill-fated honeymoon ended, Chicago was already writing their professional obituary. The Davenport offices, once buzzing with assistants, fetching lattes and arranging glossy brochures, now looked like a crime scene. Employees were carrying boxes of files out under the relentless flashes of cameras, while security guards turned away shouting contractors at the door. Lawyers ducked their heads to avoid having microphones shoved in their faces. I read the first round of lawsuits before lunch that Monday. A group of unpaid subcontractors had filed liens, followed swiftly by a union demanding emergency arbitration. Then, a smaller creditor, emboldened by the chaos, petitioned for accelerated repayment. Within 24 hours, Davenport Industries was facing a dozen separate legal claims. It was a feeding frenzy. One shark draws blood, and the rest inevitably follow. I didn't gloat. Gloating is for amateurs. I simply folded the newspaper articles, placed them in a leather-bound file, and turned my attention to more pressing matters. The true spectacle was not in the lawsuits themselves, but in their desperate, clumsy attempt to manage the story. 3 days after returning from the Bahamas, Clara arranged a press conference in front of their flagship tower downtown. She arrived in a cream-colored pantsuit, with oversized sunglasses perched on her face, every single gesture meticulously rehearsed. Leo stood behind her, pale, his jaw clenched, his hands clasped in front of him like a penitent child. The cameras rolled. Reporters shouted questions. Clara held up one manicured hand for silence. "There has been a targeted, malicious campaign waged against my family's company," she declared, her voice dripping with manufactured defiance. "Certain investors have acted in bad faith, exploiting minor contractual clauses in order to sabotage us. But make no mistake, we will recover. Davenport Industries is bigger than one person's vendetta." I watched the broadcast live, sipping tea in my living room. Her words were brittle. Her smile was cracked around the edges, and her attempt to paint me as the villain backfired within hours. One of the journalists, present sharp, hungry, and blessed with excellent sources, published the actual clauses from the contracts as screenshots. The MAC clause, the acceleration terms, the reputation triggers. Charles Davenport's signature was clearly visible at the bottom of every single page. The article was devastating in its simplicity. They had signed it, they had agreed to the terms, they had lost. Public opinion turned on a dime. Comments flooded in online. "So, she's blaming the person who kept them afloat for years? Sounds like her dad was asleep at the wheel." Classic heiress meltdown. By that evening, Clara was trending on social media not as a victim, but as a punchline. He came to see me the next night. He didn't call ahead. He knew I wouldn't answer. Instead, he simply showed up at my building, waiting in the lobby like a lost boy. My doorman phoned up, his voice hesitant. "Mr. Vance, your son is here. Should I send him away?" "No," I said. "Let him wait." I left him there for nearly half an hour before I finally descended. By the time I stepped into the lobby, Leo was pacing, his hair disheveled, his tie askew. He looked 10 years older than he had on his wedding day. "Dad," he started, his voice raw. "Why are you doing this? Do you hate me that much?" I tilted my head, studying him. "I don't hate you, Leo. I hate what you've allowed yourself to become under her influence. There is a difference." He ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand. People are losing their jobs. My wife is being humiliated. My father-in-law—" I cut him off with a raised hand. "Your father-in-law signed those contracts. He knew the risks involved. He gambled, and he lost. That is not my fault. It is his." His eyes filled with tears, a collision of anger and grief. "You don't care, do you? You don't care about me, about what this does to me?" I leaned closer, my voice calm and measured. "I care enough to let you see the truth. Sometimes, love isn't about cushioning the fall. Sometimes, it's about letting the ground teach you a lesson." I handed him an envelope. It wasn't full of money, not a lifeline. It was a copy of his wedding invitation. I had underlined Clara's words from that day, written neatly in my own hand. "Stand at the back. Outdated suit, old-fashioned look." He stared at it, the color draining from his face. Then, I added a check, made out directly to the Davenport employees, not to the company. Not to Charles, not to Clara. It was for 1 month's payroll, covered by me, with a memo line that read, "For the people who built what you took for granted." He tried to speak, but I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with a piece of paper trembling in his hands. While Clara was floundering in public, Amelia was quietly becoming the city's new darling. Her wedding gift, my gift, had not stayed private for long. A bridesmaid's photo of me setting the lacquered box on her gift table had surfaced online. The note I had written, thanking her for her kindness in the rain, had circulated widely on social media. Within a week, local news outlets were covering Amelia and Samuel's story. The EMT who had once struggled, now blessed with a beachfront cottage, a new car, and rental properties providing a steady income. The headlines gushed, "Kindness rewarded." Local nurses' act of generosity leads to a fortune of gratitude. I attended the title signing quietly, slipping into the back of the attorney's office while cameras clicked away outside. Amelia hugged me, tears in her eyes, and the banker shook my hand with a newfound respect. I left before the reporters could corner me, satisfied to watch the glow from a distance. The contrast was perfect. One bride was being ridiculed for her arrogance. The other was being celebrated for her kindness. Both stories traced back to me, though I never once gave a public statement. Behind the headlines, the legal machinery continued to turn. The Davenports' lawyers filed frantic motions, accusing me of bad faith, of sabotage, of having a personal vendetta. My attorneys countered with icy precision, laying out every clause, every covenant, every compliance report in black and white. I hadn't bent the rules. I hadn't lied. I hadn't coerced. The judges knew the difference. At the same time, the vendors escalated their fury. One contractor chained himself to the doors of the Davenport headquarters, holding a sign that read, "Pay us before you pay yourselves." Photos of the scene went viral. Employees began leaking memos about withheld paychecks. A class action lawsuit was looming. The empire wasn't just crumbling financially, it was rotting morally in the public eye. Reputation, I have learned, is more fragile than glass. It doesn't just shatter once, it cracks slowly, the splinters spreading until the whole surface collapses. Clara thought she could control the narrative with a pantsuit and a microphone. What she never understood was that the truth, once it has been exposed, needs no press conference. And Drew, my son, thought he could sway me with tears, with appeals to our love. But love without accountability is just weakness. I didn't raise him to be weak. I rewarded kindness in public so the world would remember that it still exists. I punished cruelty in private so they would never enjoy the spectacle. The Davenports had mistaken me for a pawn in their game. They had forgotten that I was the one holding the board. The first whisper of the auction reached me through a discreet email from one of my banking contacts. The subject line read simply, "Davenport Asset Liquidation." I opened it over breakfast, unfolding the PDF with the neat precision of someone who has seen 100 such notices in his lifetime. It was a list of everything they had once flaunted as untouchable. Antique cars, original artwork, designer furniture hauled from their various penthouses. Even the grand piano that Clara had insisted on importing from Italy, lacquered black and barely ever played. These were the kinds of items meant to symbolize permanence, now reduced to lot numbers in a clearance catalog. I printed the document, smoothed it flat on my table, and studied it as if it were scripture. This was more than just financial ruin. This was a spectacle. Auction houses are not discreet funerals. They are public executions where wealth is paraded, tagged, bid upon, and carried away by strangers. The sale was scheduled for Friday, open only to registered bidders. I reserved my proxies quietly, 3 different buyers with no obvious connection to me. They would carry my paddle, raise my numbers, and retrieve what I wanted. Because for revenge to be truly satisfying, it requires not only collapse, but reclamation. Friday came, gray and wet. The kind of rain that slicks marble steps and makes umbrellas bloom like dark flowers outside the city's grand buildings. I arrived unannounced, a dark coat draped over my shoulders, and slipped into the back of the auction hall. My proxies were already seated in different sections, their paddles resting on their laps. The room hummed with the low, predatory energy of vultures waiting to feast. Wealthy collectors, opportunistic brokers, and a handful of rivals who couldn't resist the theater of seeing the Davenport dignity stripped bare and sold. At the front, the auctioneer stood beneath bright lights, his voice as sharp as a whip. Behind him, slides projected each item as it was presented. Lot 1, he began. A 2019 Rolls-Royce Phantom, formerly the property of the Davenport family. Opening bid, $150,000. Hands rose, paddles flashed. The car sold in under 2 minutes, for half its original value, gone with the bang of a gavel. A murmur of applause rippled through the room, not of admiration, but of schadenfreude. I watched, silently, my proxies taking notes. Lot by lot, their lives were being dismantled. Clara's designer gowns, once paraded at charity galas, were sold for pennies on the dollar. Charles's collection of watches, each piece engraved, was scattered to buyers who would never think of him again. The black lacquered piano found a new owner within minutes. By the time Lot 42 arrived, I lifted a single finger, signaling my first proxy. It was a Chagall painting that had hung in their dining room, a piece I had once admired over champagne while Clara prattled on about its color story. My proxy bid without hesitation. Competitors faltered. The gavel fell. It was mine. The room didn't know it, but I was reclaiming their history, piece by piece. The true sting of an auction isn't in losing the object itself. It's in watching strangers place a monetary value on your memories. The Davenports were there, of course. They had no choice. They sat near the front, stiff-backed, their lawyers whispering in their ears, their faces pale. Charles looked like a deflated balloon, his eyes sunken, his jaw slack with disbelief. Clara wore another cream-colored pantsuit, her armor against humiliation, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Drew sat beside her, his head lowered, not even attempting to hide his shame. When the auctioneer introduced their art collection as a liquidation necessitated by current circumstances, a ripple of laughter broke out in the room. Clara's face froze. Charles clenched his fists. Drew winced. And I sat at the back, unseen, sipping water, savoring every single second. The climax came with the listing of their show home, the downtown Chicago penthouse they had staged for buyers and parties. It was once their crown jewel, now stripped of tenants, its value gutted by the scandal. Lot 87, the auctioneer called out. The Davenport Industries show property. Opening bid, $2 million. Hands shot up. The numbers climbed. My second proxy joined the bidding at $3 million, his bids deliberate and unhurried. At $3.8 million, the competitors dropped away. The gavel fell. Mine again. I didn't smile. Smiling was unnecessary. The victory was in the silence of Clara's gasp, the slump of Charles's shoulders, and the way Leo didn't even lift his head. The property they had once paraded as proof of their empire now belonged to me, through a proxy they would never be able to trace. But ownership was never the point. It was what I did with it afterward that mattered. The Chagall painting I donated to a local veterans center, where it now hangs in a common room, bringing color to the lives of men and women who are rebuilding themselves from ruin. Clara had once bragged about it to bankers. Now it is admired by survivors who don't even know her name. The black piano I gifted to a public school's music program, where children with calloused fingers and bright eyes play on it daily. The Rolls Royce, purchased by one of my proxies, I sold to Amelia for $1. She tried to insist on paying more. I accepted 10. She drove it away herself, her laughter echoing down the block. And the downtown show home that I kept. Not to live in, not to flaunt. I converted it into transitional housing for first-generation college students on scholarship. A press release announced the opening of a space for young people to rise, funded by private philanthropy. My name was not attached, but theirs was most certainly erased. A week later, Leo tried one last time. He came to my townhouse at dusk, pale and drawn, his eyes hollow. He didn't knock loudly, just stood at the door until I answered. "Why?" His voice cracked. "Why couldn't you just let it go? You've destroyed everything." I regarded him evenly. "I didn't destroy anything, Leo. I enforced contracts. Your father-in-law signed them. Your wife mocked me. I simply allowed the consequences to arrive." He swallowed hard. "You could have stopped it." I shook my head. "No, stopping it would have been a weakness, and I don't traffic in weakness." He blinked, tears threatening to fall. "I don't even know who you are anymore." I leaned closer, my voice quiet. "No, Leo, you don't know who you are anymore, and until you do, you'll never understand me." I closed the door gently, leaving him standing in the hall. Auction rooms are theaters of humiliation. They don't just strip you of your assets. They strip you of your illusions. For years, the Davenports had believed that their wealth meant permanence, that marble floors and imported chandeliers could hold back the tides of fortune. They forgot that true wealth is leverage, contracts, and timing. They forgot that permanence belongs only to those who understand the rules of the game. I understood. I always have. I had been told to stand at the back of the wedding photographs, so I wouldn't ruin the picture. Now, I stood at the back of an auction hall, unseen, while the picture of their lives was torn into pieces and sold off to the highest bidder. And when the gavel fell for the final time, I walked out into the rain, my coat pulled tight, my proxies trailing behind with the paperwork, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear sense of finality. Mercy belongs to the innocent. Accountability belongs to the guilty. And the Davenports were guilty of arrogance. The city never stops moving, even when empires fall. Trucks still rumbled down Michigan Avenue. Brokers still shouted into their phones. Parents still rushed their children across crosswalks, with juice boxes spilling in their backpacks. The collapse of the Davenports had sent ripples through Chicago's real estate world, yes, but only ripples. The tide of the city continued on, indifferent. And that, for them, was the cruelest truth of all. They had once believed themselves to be indispensable, their name etched into the city's skyline. Now, they were simply one more cautionary tale, their ruin noted in boardrooms with a shrug before everyone's attention turned to the next big deal. For me, it was different. For me, the ending was personal. I didn't need their destruction for my own survival. I had survived long before their name ever meant anything to me. But I needed it for clarity, for the lesson, and for the profound satisfaction of knowing that when someone tries to erase me from a picture, I will redraw the entire frame. The first time I visited Amelia and Samuel after their honeymoon, the cottage was already blooming with life. The Big Sur property had always been one of my favorites. A white stucco jewel perched above the Pacific, with vines curling along the stone walls, the sea air clean and unpretentious. It had been mine for years, but I had always kept it vacant, waiting for the right moment to decide its fate. Now, it belonged to them. I arrived without fanfare, no driver, just myself, in a linen shirt and a silk scarf. Amelia greeted me at the gate, her eyes still wide with the disbelief of a woman who had been given something she never imagined possible. Samuel was carrying boxes inside, laughing the sound of a man who felt the ground secure beneath his feet for the first time in his life. "Mr. Vance," Amelia said, hugging me tightly, "we don't know how to thank you." "You already have," I replied, "on a rainy day when you gave me an umbrella. Gratitude doesn't always come in the form of a check. Sometimes it comes in the form of a reminder that kindness still exists." We walked through the house together, her voice trembling with awe, as she described how she planned to turn one room into a nursery and another into a library. I watched her touch the walls gently, reverently, as though she were thanking the house itself. And in that moment, I knew I had chosen correctly. My wealth, redirected, had fertilized something alive, instead of just propping up a monument to arrogance. Weeks later, at Apex Global's quarterly strategy meeting, I presented the case not as a vendetta, but as a lesson. The room was full of men in tailored suits, their watches gleaming, their pens tapping nervously on notepads. They all knew what had happened. They had whispered about it at private dinners, speculated about my motives. Now, I was giving them the version that mattered. I projected charts onto the wall, debt ratios, compliance triggers, bridge line overextensions. I spoke clinically, dissecting Davenport Industries as if it were a cadaver on a slab. "This," I concluded, pointing to the final slide, "is why you never build an empire on a single source of liquidity that you do not control. Diversification is not a theory, it is survival." No one asked me about Clara. No one asked me about Leo. They all knew better. They took their notes. They nodded. They left the room with the clear understanding that in our world, strength belongs not to those who strut and preen, but to those who write the clauses. A month after the auction, Leo sent me a letter through a mutual friend. A thick envelope, my name scrolled on the front in his familiar handwriting. I held it in my hands for a long time, feeling the weight of it, the ghost of my little boy who once left me crayon drawings folded in the exact same way. I didn't open it. Instead, I fed it slowly into the shredder. The sound of paper tearing filled the silence of my study. Strip by strip, his words dissolved into nothing. Not because I didn't love him, but because love does not mean surrender. He had chosen his life. He had chosen his bride. And choices have consequences. I will not save him from them. The downtown show home that I had reclaimed at the auction opened quietly 6 months later. The press release was small, tucked into a corner of the Tribune. But the work itself was loud. The penthouse that had once been staged with imported Italian sofas and champagne towers was now a transitional housing center for first-generation college students on scholarship. I attended the opening in person, standing among young men and women clutching textbooks, their eyes wide with hope. The rooms that had once echoed with a hollow, empty luxury now rang with laughter, with the sound of pencils scratching on homework, with quiet conversations about the future set against the hum of city traffic. One young woman, no older than Clara, hugged me so hard I almost lost my breath. "I didn't think people like you even saw people like us," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "People like me don't need to be seen. We need to see." And I knew that if Clara ever saw the photographs the show home she had once paraded through, now occupied by the very people she would have sneered at, it would sting more than any lawsuit ever could. By then, the calls had stopped. The lawsuits had either been dismissed or settled for pennies on the dollar. The Davenport name no longer carried any weight in real estate circles. Their offices had been vacated, their flagship tower renamed under a new developer. Clara still tried to maintain a social media presence, posting filtered photos from second-tier galas, but the comments were merciless. She had become a cautionary meme, the kind of person people whispered about with a pity that was disguised as mockery. Leo faded from view along with her, his once bright eyes now dulled, his career prospects shriveled by his association with her family. They lived in a smaller apartment now, stripped of the trappings they had once worn like armor. I drove past their building once, late at night, and saw the lights on in their window, two silhouettes moving inside. I felt nothing, no triumph, no grief, just clarity. The silence between us had become permanent, and silence, I have realized, is the sharpest blade of all. One evening, I poured myself a glass of scotch and stood at my window, looking out over the city. The lights stretched on endlessly, each one a story, a life, a secret. Somewhere in that vast grid, the Davenports sat, licking their wounds. Somewhere else, Amelia and Samuel were raising a toast in their Big Sur cottage, their future secure. And here I stood, not at the back of anyone's photo, but exactly where I had chosen to be, alone, unbowed, and in control. I thought back to that day at the wedding, to the sting of Clara's voice as she hissed at me to stand at the back. The humiliation had lasted for only a few seconds. The consequences had lasted forever. At the wedding, I had been erased from a picture. But in the end, I had redrawn the entire composition. And this time, my smile was real. Thank you for spending this time with us here at Echoes of Strength. The journey we have shared today isn't just about what happened to our protagonist. It's about what can happen for you. Perhaps you saw a piece of your own story in his. Perhaps you felt the sting of betrayal, the weight of loss, or the hunger for justice. Whatever part of the story touched you most, please remember this. You are stronger than your pain, and your story is still unfolding. If you want to take the next step toward writing that new chapter for yourself, don't forget to pick up a copy of our best-selling book, Forging a New Path After the Fire. Inside, you'll find practical tools, heartfelt encouragement, and strategies to help you break free from what has tried to destroy you. Click the link in the description box to get your copy today and begin your own journey toward healing and renewal. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story resonated with you the most? Hit the subscribe button and please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might be the encouragement that someone else desperately needs to hear tonight. And if this story spoke to your heart, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Echoes of Strength, and ring the bell so you never miss another episode. Because here, every story is a reminder. Pain may write a chapter, but you get to decide how the book ends.